When I think about dual-wielding 9mm, cinematic character introductions, and bullet time, one particular experience comes to mind. Max settings on El Matador. Welcome. My name's Azadesh and welcome to another PC game retrospective video. Now, there are a lot of video games that take varying levels of inspiration from other titles. Some would even make a case that every first-person shooter since Wolfenstein takes inspiration from that original title. And there's nothing wrong with taking inspiration from other titles. Duke Nukem 3D is a great case of taking inspiration from Doom, Call of Duty from Medal of Honor, Uncharted from Tomb Raider, and so on. But there's a fine line between taking inspiration and taking ideas from other games. Taking inspiration generally involves a system or mechanic being modified or improved in some way. Taking ideas generally involves lifting entire components of another game's DNA and repackaging them as your own. This fine line is one that El Matador constantly walks, and while arguments could be made on either side here, it's clear that the developers based a lot of the game's core story, gameplay, and presentation off that of Max Payne. I mean, they even chose to put a quote on the North American box art, which labeled the game as Max Payne meets Far Cry, so they certainly were not shy about admitting this. And side note, I have absolutely no idea how this game could be possibly considered related to Far Cry. It's literally a different story, setting, perspective, gameplay loop. Honestly, this is a real mystery, and I get the idea this text was included to try and associate the game with the excellent Far Cry, as opposed to actually hold any truth to the statement. Regardless of endorsements, the game was only ever released on PC, and this is the version we're playing today. There's a very simple widescreen patch being used here to provide a more cinematic presentation, but apart from that, we are playing the latest version available from GOG. Now, it's fair to say that critical reception was not brilliant upon release. Actually, to be fair, it wasn't good at all, with a lot of reviews suggesting that you just go and play the much better original game, Max Payne. On the topic of story, when I generally provide an overview on a game's story, I'm often quite careful not to go into any major spoilers. I generally just give the main plot setting and move on. I'm also quite careful in my footage not to show anything late game or details which might clue the player into some type of big plot reveal. I mean, in my RoboCop Rogue City review, I even blurred out the objectives on screen so not to reveal too much. I do this mainly because I recognize that not everyone who watches my content has played these games before, and in the hope that if they like the look of the game from the video, they can go and play it without having the plot spoiled. Honestly though, in the case of El Matador, there's nothing to worry about here because the story is so disjointed that even after playing the game, I don't think I can accurately recount what actually happened throughout the campaign. The story, and I use that term very loosely, follows DEA agent Victor Corbett on a state-sanctioned holiday to Colombia to help combat the growing drug threat within the region. What this translates to are missions which require you to effectively murder everyone and then generally face a boss before a rinse and repeat over and over. Now, Max Payne's story was not only a good tale, but it featured a likeable and relatable main protagonist in Max. Victor, on the other hand, just comes off as a jerk most of the time, and this fact, combined with some very questionable writing, really brings any type of narrative flow to a grinding halt. Honestly, the voice acting isn't that bad, but the actual lines given to the voice actors are at times beyond ridiculous.
His villa is a little fortress. If he fights back, don't hesitate and shoot him dead. Either way, he'll be sentenced to death.
Are you absolutely certain, Captain?
You can judge him when he is on the autopsy table.
Listen, I don't know who you are, and if I really wanted, I could just blow you and the whole house into tiny pieces. But I like you.
Before we continue, a massive thank you to those who support the channel. If you enjoy this type of content, please consider liking the video or subscribing to the channel. With that out of the way, let's slow down time, unleash some bullets, and head back to 2006 to remember El Matador. What can I say about El Matador's gameplay? Well, first let's talk about the tutorial, which does an excellent job of explaining all of the core mechanics and systems in somewhat of a believable environment, being a presumably DEA or military camp. Everything's well explained, from the use of bullet time, or time-slowing mechanic as it's called, to the use of weapons and even the planting of explosives. And on the planting of explosives, watch how it's done. You walk up to the yellow silhouette, press interact, and the explosive is planted. Remember this as it will be important later. In terms of the basics like camera and control, it's hard to put this into words, but at the most basic level, the camera mostly operates as you would expect a camera to operate, and the controls mostly operate as you would expect controls to operate. However, the other systems and mechanics within the game, such as combat, the environments, and level design, not to mention presentation, all conspire against these basic systems to make camera and control feel far too often like an exercise in frustration as opposed to a tightly integrated basic function. There's a few reasons for this, and perhaps the irony here is that a big part of why these problems exist is because the developers essentially borrowed the same camera and control from Max Payne, without accounting for other variables that have changed, such as the environment and level design. In Max Payne, the majority of combat takes place in small to medium areas. There are some exceptions, like the occasional rooftop, but for the most part, while the overall levels are quite large, they are broken into much smaller set pieces for combat. El Matador goes for a much larger combat area, however the camera and control just don't work that well for this type of environment, especially in combat. I lost count how many times I would be taking damage from somewhere and have no idea where from, not just because of the scope of the environment, but because of the presentation decisions around some of the levels and enemy design. The enemies effectively blend into the environment. Now, maybe you could make a case for realism here, and if this was the only sin the game committed, I'd probably be on board for that. However, it's not. One of the most frustrating control issues happened just 10 minutes into the game, when you're given a teammate to help clear an upcoming area. Now, the explorer in me decided to check another room before proceeding to the next area, something I think would be a fairly normal thing to do in a third-person shooter. Only my teammate decided to stand in the doorway and prevent me from leaving. I tried slowing down time, I tried shooting at him, but no matter what I did, I couldn't get him out of the way to leave the room. Then, to make matters even worse, while exploring the room to try and find any way I might be able to get out, I managed to get stuck on an object which required a reload of my last save to overcome. To be fair, I would have had to do the same given the doorway situation anyway, but when you encounter this 10 minutes into a game, doing something that is not at all unusual, you have to wonder how this didn't come up in playtesting. Then we come to combat, and like camera and control, parts of it in isolation, such as the actual gunplay, are fine. However, when you combine other elements of the game with the overall combat system, even the seemingly solid gunplay starts to rapidly descend into frustration. Firstly, even if we ignore the fact that 90% of the weapons are literal copy-pastes from Max Payne, the issue is that you'll gain access to most of these weapons within the first 5 minutes of the game. Generally, shooters ration out the introduction of new weapons throughout the game to build a sense of accomplishment and power within the player. However, in El Matador, you can basically use anything you want right from the start. Now, you'd think this would make the game a lot easier, however, it does not. When I reviewed Max Payne, one of the things I was critical about was certain enemies hiding in places and getting shots on Max before the player had a chance to react. Let me tell you, this is far worse here, with virtually all combat encounters featuring enemies which pop out and get shots on you before you have a chance to react. And even in the few situations they don't, due to environmental design decisions, you won't see the enemy until it's too late. These enemies, regardless of difficulty level, have incredibly accurate aim, being able to kill you with only a few seconds of sustained gunfire. Now, you do have health and armor packs you can pick up throughout the adventure, but these tend to be very strangely placed. Sometimes you'll travel through an entire area with a health pickup in every room, and other times you will go entire large areas without a pickup. Oh, and the icing on the cake here, sometimes there's actually no death animation. You just get a game over screen with your character still standing. I'm going to give the game the benefit of the doubt here and assume this is a bug as opposed to intended design, but either way, it's a far cry from the standards you would expect from a 2006 shooter. The last point I'll make on combat is that the game also features boss fights, and you know what? I'll just let the footage do the talking here. Behold, boss fights. During your quest to work through each level, you will often be given objectives, such as activating an elevator or planting explosives. The objectives themselves seem logical enough, but the execution ranges from challenging to broken. Early on in the adventure, you're given an objective to take an elevator somewhere. Knowing this should be quite easy, I enter the elevator and look for the hand icon indicating I can press the button. Nothing. Okay, maybe I need to power it up or something. After spending a good amount of time exploring the area again, I return to the elevator and try again. Maybe I need to press the other elevator call button or something. Still no luck. After further exploration with still nothing new found, I return to the elevator and think maybe I need to shoot the controls. So I shoot them and nothing happens. Then I happen to turn my character on a very specific spot, one slightly further away than before, and I see the magic hand icon suggesting I can press the button. I press the button and proceed on my way. This type of experience should not have passed through playtesting, and combined with the earlier example, makes me wonder if any actual playtesting took place for this title. Another less frustrating but fair valuation on the quality control here occurs when you are given the objective to disarm a bomb. You witness a cutscene in which the bomb can be seen beneath a desk. This is what you need to disarm. Right. Only when you reach the room, you find the bomb is the same yellow silhouette that shows when you need to plant a bomb. So you would think that when you press the action button to disarm it, it would disappear. No, it goes from a yellow silhouette to an actual bomb, the exact same animation for planting a bomb. This might seem like a really trivial thing to mention, but handling this sequence in literally any other way would have been more consistent and immersive than how it was done. It's also far from the only example of what would appear to be a simple lack of interest in delivering a quality product and instead opting for the quickest option to ship the game. Presentation is probably best described as average. There are some positives, such as physics and environmental destruction, combined with most of the levels doing a reasonable job of portraying the environment. However, even ignoring softlocks and clipping issues, there are a lot of things which just amount to a lack of interest in quality. Whether it's the fact that a cop is smoking an unlit cigarette, or Victor is talking on a phone that's not plugged in, these examples of things which the developers just assumed the player wouldn't notice or care are numerous and frequent. And it's not just the props in the world, it extends to the art direction too. I mean, take a look at the illumination on these plants in a largely dark room. Now, I'm not looking for ray-traced reflections or global illumination or anything like that, but surely there was a more realistic way of lighting these plants without making it look like they're sitting in broad daylight. Oh, and in a strange turn of events, which is likely related to modern operating systems as opposed to the game's original logic, when the third level loaded in, I experienced severe stuttering to the stage where it was unplayable. It's the first level which features a large outdoor area, and I suspect this may have been the root cause. Oddly enough, after turning down the texture settings, I was able to resume with relatively flawless performance. Now, if the presentation is average, then the sound design is very average. Sound effects and voice acting are okay, but music and mixing are all over the shop. Firstly, it's very frequent that the music will just stop and you'll be treated to half a minute's silence before it begins to loop again. Not really a big problem for me, as I don't feel the music really matched the tone of the game anyway, apart from perhaps the first level, which happens to be set in a nightclub. Then there's the audio mixing, where bosses speaking to you and other characters will often sound disjointed and jumbled, and sometimes even conflict with the volume level of the music. I wouldn't say the game would be better played without sound, but expectations should certainly be tempered. I have to admit that when I first saw the screenshots for El Matador on GOG, I thought, wow, this game looks pretty cool. Even if it's a rip-off of Max Payne, I'll probably still enjoy it. Although the more I played the game, not only did I realize I was not enjoying it, but I actually questioned if some of the screenshots shown on the promotional page are actually from within the game, as I wasn't able to reproduce shadows looking anything like those shown in some of the pictures. Regardless of how the game looks though, El Matador's biggest challenge is that it tries to take what worked in Max Payne and carry over those systems and mechanics to a completely different game. At times it works, but for the majority of time, it does not. Now, I've tried to be objective when comparing the game to Max Payne and have only used B-roll from the 2001 original as opposed to the 2003 sequel. I don't believe that Max Payne is a perfect game. I certainly think it has its own issues. However, its story, innovation, and presentation are rock solid, and these things more than make up for some of its downfalls. In the case of El Matador, it barely has a story, it borrows most of its ideas from other games, and its presentation leaves a lot of room for improvement. I will say that I managed to purchase this game on sale for approximately $1. Do I feel I got value for money? Yes, probably. Despite the many challenges the game has, there are glimmers of fun. However, it is 4 hours that I could have spent playing another game, something I arguably can't put a price on. But that's enough from me. Do you agree or disagree with my opinions? Let me know down in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching.